I spoke about evolution and ecology in my video entitled Never Release Your Pets into the Wild. A point that I made was all of these animals that exist in the wild are interdependent on each other, and they exist in a very delicate balance with one another. Introducing alien animals can upset that balance with potentially devastating effects. As I was making these points, I was reminded of a comment made by Incurable Trickster on my communities section, on one of my posts under my community tab. By the way, I don't always have time to make videos, and so I often share posts under my community tab. So check that out. He wrote about the damage to wildlife and environment by feral horses in Australia. Proposals to cull these horses have been met with protests. Incurable Trickster concluded by saying, "Horses are in no danger of becoming extinct, but rare and unique animals such as the corroboree frog are." This led me to consider the impact of introduced alien animals and the proposed solutions, using Australia as an example. I knew very little about Australian feral horses, so I had to do a bit of reading. The state of Victoria had authorized a cull of feral horses called brumbies, but this was halted by an injunction. After some legal debate, the cull was allowed to continue. The brumbie cull was considered necessary to protect the fragile alpine environment. A similar situation is to be found with donkey culling in the Kimberley region of Western Australia. Since 1978, about 570,000 donkeys have been culled in that area, and there are thought to be around 3,000 left. Donkeys were introduced into Western Australia in the 1860s to haul freight in areas inhospitable to other forms of freight management, such as horse or bullock. The original reason for culling donkeys was economic, because they were reducing pasture available for farmed cattle. But the continuation of the cull now has environmental motivation as well as economic. Another alien species introduced into Australia for transport purposes is the camel. They were introduced into Australia in the 19th century, imported from Afghanistan and India. There is now a substantial feral population, which has to have its numbers reduced by culling. Recent record high temperatures and the effects of wildfires have brought drought conditions for camels, whose attempts to find water have led to intrusion into human habitation and destruction of property and pollution of drinking water. The culling of 10,000 camels was ordered and carried out by shooting from helicopters. As I read about the culling of horses, donkeys, and camels, I came to realize two things. Australia has a long and unfortunate history with controlling introduced species, and there has been a willingness to cull these animals once they had become pests. The government of Western Australia suggests the four following reasons why animals are regarded as pests. Number 1, preying on domestic or farm animals. 2, damaging crops and food production. 3, posing a threat to native animals and ecosystems. And 4, being a nuisance and health hazard to people. One of the earliest animals introduced to Australia is the dingo, or wild dog. Skeletal remains indicate the dingo was introduced into Western Australia around 3,500 years ago. Its status is controversial, with some regarding it as an introduced pest animal to be culled and controlled, while others view it as having an important place in the Australian ecosystem because it has been around for so long. In an attempt to reduce the numbers of domestic animals, such as sheep, being preyed on by dingoes, a dingo exclusion fence was completed in 1885. It is 5,614 kilometers or 3,488 miles long. Regular culling by shooting, poisoning, and trapping has also been carried out to keep dingo numbers down. However, the story is far from simple. On the dingo side of the fence, there is more grass, because there are fewer kangaroos to eat the grass. Since dingoes play a part in keeping kangaroo numbers down, the absence of dingoes can mean less grass for sheep. Another argument against culling dingoes is that dingoes prey on and suppress other introduced pest species such as rabbits, foxes, cats, and feral dogs. An environmental group called the Working Dingoes Saving Wildlife Project was formed as a collaboration between Aus Eco Solutions and the Australian Dingo Foundation, with the aim of reintroducing dingoes into specific areas with the hope that the dingoes would reduce the incidence of other pests. I will provide the Facebook pages for the Working Dingoes Saving Wildlife and the Australian Dingo Foundation. You can make your own mind up about these organizations, but my impression is that they are both influenced by the same romanticism and wishful thinking that we see on dog-based sites. There are references to dingoes as pets, and descriptions of how cute and beautiful they look. There are stories about how a dingo saved my life. This does not instill confidence in their scientific objectivity. The Australian Dingo Foundation Facebook page has a Dingo of the Week spot and describes one of the dingoes as, quote, a shy girl with a gentle soul. No wonder sheep farmers are skeptical. Another, more recent invasive species that was fenced in is the rabbit. The state barrier fence of Western Australia, formerly known as the rabbit-proof fence, is part of a series of fences designed to keep rabbits and other agricultural pests out of Western Australia. The story is that a landowner by the name of Thomas Austin imported 24 rabbits from England in October 1859 so he could indulge in his hobby of hunting. The increase in the rabbit population in Australia is calculated to be the fastest increase in any mammal population in the world. The Australian government tried to contain the problem by traditional culling methods of shooting and trapping. This wasn't enough, so in 1901, the decision was made to build 3 rabbit-proof fences. Completed by 1907, the longest fence stretches over 1,138 miles. By 1949, the traditional methods of culling had little impact on the rabbit population. There had been earlier experiments with a rabbit virus called myxomatosis, with disappointing results, and the decision was made to try again. It wasn't until 1951 that the environmental conditions were just right for the rapid spread of the virus, and rabbits started to die by the millions. Myxomatosis was effective for around 15 years, by which time a substantial percentage of the rabbit population had developed resistance and immunity. In 1995, it was planned to release another virus called calicivirus, but it escaped the laboratory and spread naturally. It reduced the rabbit population to 10 to 15% of previous levels. Grass and native plants returned to previous levels, and indigenous animals reliant on pasture taken by rabbits started to increase in number. Two observations to be made from this are that the release of even a small number of alien invasive species can have unexpected, overwhelming, and catastrophic consequences. The other observation is that culling can appear ineffective if the numbers of animals or their ability to reproduce overwhelms the ability to cull them. There are other examples of invasive species, such as cane toads, numerically overwhelming efforts to eradicate them. In an article about the damage caused by feral pigs in Australia, Beck Gray, local Land Services invasive species team leader, is quoted as saying, "You have to get close to 90% of them knocked down to get ahead of their reproduction rate." This observation demonstrates one of the weaknesses of the trap-neuter-release method of animal pest management. It can never exceed the reproductive abilities of the pest animal. I will return to this later. The Queensland government website lists the damage caused by feral pigs into the three categories of environmental, economic, and social, and their impact is substantial. They are not cute, cuddly little piglets. Australia has shown a willingness to use culling in attempts to control invasive species and to protect their native animals and plants. In February 2021, formal advice was given to use part of the state of Victoria's brushfire recovery budget to introduce aerial culling of goats, foxes, deer, and pigs, but not horses. Some indigenous animals have come to be regarded as pests and their overpopulation seen as troublesome. For example, 1.6 million kangaroos were culled in 2016, a similar amount to the previous year and to subsequent years. The main reason for the cull is environmental, although some people disagree that kangaroo overpopulation has the negative effect claimed. The increase in kangaroo population has partly been attributed as a consequence of culling dingoes that would normally prey on them and keep the numbers down. I learned a number of things in my Australian case study. Prior to this, my knowledge of culling had mainly come from dog-related sites, with dog worshippers arguing vigorously against it. Stray dogs are pests in most continents. They spread diseases, harass, intimidate, and attack humans. They are an important vector for rabies, the main vector for rabies worldwide, causing over 60,000 human deaths a year. They bark and howl, causing anxiety and sleeplessness in humans. They destroy property. They attack and kill wildlife and domestic animals. They are driving approximately 200 animal species to extinction. They are pests, and yet dog worshippers and their organizations do not perceive a human problem. They perceive an animal welfare problem. Their solutions tend to be aimed at improving the lifestyle of the dogs or extending their lives, rather than trying to contain or eradicate the problem. They claim that culling does not work, or they use an example of a disorganized culling program and exaggerate the cruelty of it by using emotionally laden language to influence political decisions. Here is an example of such a technique. This is a headline from an article about dog culling. Horrific images capture the brutality of Egypt's dog cull, which sees strays poisoned and thrown into rivers or shot dead and left to rot in the streets. In the body of the article, shot dogs are described as being left twitching in agony in their final moments. This reads like the worst horror movie anyone has ever seen. Who could support culling if this is what it represents? Of course, there is no mention of humans lying twitching in agony in their final moments after a dog attack. This is a dishonest form of reporting, using emotion rather than scientific fact. Here is another example of an emotionally leading headline from Dogs Today. Thousands of dogs to be saved from horrific culling in Mauritius. This article also brings in the very persuasive faulty logic known as appeal to authority. It tells us that many British stars of music and TV love to go to Mauritius on holiday, but are, quote, distraught at the barbaric treatment of dogs on the streets and beaches. We wouldn't want these celebrities we've never heard of to have their holidays spoiled, would we? That would be a step too far. This kind of emotional appeal is equivalent to sending out a questionnaire asking people if they approve of slowly and painfully killing animals with maximum cruelty and savagery, and then disposing of their bodies in pools of stagnant water. This type of reporting is manipulative. We see it on video channels which show extremes of cruelty against dogs, and then claim it is standard practice when culling dogs. Another technique is to show dogs being shot quickly and cleanly with a single round, and then describe the dogs' deaths as drawn-out agony. It is important to know when you are being conned and why you are being conned. These aggressive, misanthropic stories are intended to divert attention away from the harm that dogs cause and divert blame to humans. The cause of dog welfare is promoted above the welfare of humans and the needs of the environment. Dogs are portrayed as victims when they are not. The word innocent is often used to describe dogs when they are neither innocent nor guilty. These are human attributes. Dogs are dogs and do what dogs do. They are amoral creatures, pursuing their instinctive needs. Once emotionally laden rhetoric takes center stage, it hijacks the dialogue and elbows out any rationally and logically constructed debates. The whole discussion of the topic becomes emotional. Following on from the claims that culling is sadistic cruelty is the claim that it doesn't work anyway. This is part of the dialogue to get us to accept the alternatives offered by the dog lobby. These alternatives are TNR, or trap-neuter release, or mass injections of dogs to prevent rabies. The organization called World Animal Protection is upfront about their aims. They state that, quote, we move governments worldwide to end the inhumane culling of millions of dogs each year, because mass dog vaccination is the only proven solution to rabies, end quote. According to them, quote, vaccinating at least 70% of the dogs in an area creates herd immunity, slowing the spread of rabies until it dies out. I looked for references to support this contention on their website, but did not find any. I found other sources that repeated their claim, but could not find any original research on the subject. So, as they are so certain of their facts, I will have to take their word for it. Two problems remain. One is that rabies is not the only problem associated with stray dogs. And the second point is the difficulty of successfully inoculating 70% of a rapidly increasing dog population, which is difficult to track down and catch, and is uncontrolled by any means. In 2006, Beijing initiated a program to inoculate stray dogs against rabies. But in 2017, it was still being reported that rabies was still a serious problem in stray dogs. Possibly the original campaign was not adequately supported, or it just didn't work. At the time of the 2006 campaign, Ji Lin, vice mayor of Beijing, admitted that he was not optimistic because of the large number of strays in the city. Inoculating dogs against rabies does not solve the problem of people afraid to leave their homes at night, as in this report from Leh in India. There is a considerable resistance to the subject of culling in the dog-worshipping universe. Often, they will protest and campaign against culling, therefore making sure that it cannot work, and then presenting the results of their sabotage as evidence of the impotence of culling. It seems that culling is generally accepted as necessary and accepted for most animals, but it becomes cruel, inhumane, and ineffective when applied to urban stray dogs. This process operates under the principle of some we love, some we hate, some we eat. The title of a book by Hal Herzog, looking at our complex relationship with animals. There are some animals in the hate category, such as mice and rats, that we are willing to cull personally. We can do it without permission and with complete impunity, and the means to cull them are readily available at the local hardware store. If there are any rat protection organizations referring to this as a massacre of rats, I have never heard of them. We don't usually cull food animals or other animals commercially exploited for their body products. We have few misgivings about killing them without any great thought or protest. When we do cull such commercially exploited animals, it is usually to prevent the spread of infections to humans or to other animals. A recent example is the culling of 17 million minks in Denmark in November 2020 in response to some of them testing positive for COVID-19. Other examples are the culling of chickens to prevent the spread of avian flu, or the culling of cattle to manage mad cow disease. In such cases, culling is presented as a robust and effective means of stopping infection. When culling is discussed as a means of dealing with dogs, it suddenly becomes inadequate and ineffective. My investigation into Australia has been interesting, and I have learned a number of important points. These are: the introduction of non-native species has unpredictable consequences. Attempting to control or eradicate these invasive species also has unforeseen and unpredictable consequences. Animals can be considered to be pests for a variety of reasons. The government of Western Australia provided the following 4 reasons: preying on domestic or farm animals, damaging crops and food production, posing a threat to native animals and ecosystems, and being a nuisance and health hazard to people. Native species can also become pests. Culling takes different forms and may require extreme or unusual methods to deal with extreme and unusual situations. For example, the use of the myxomatosis virus. To be effective, culling may sometimes need a bit of assistance from special conditions. The myxomatosis virus was tried at different times until the right weather conditions came along to make it effective. Other methods of control may need to be implemented alongside culling. For example, the rabbit-proof fence or the dingo fence. Culling alone may not be an effective control strategy. Culling must be planned accurately and implemented responsibly. A cost-benefit analysis was carried out alongside the culling of donkeys in the Kimberley range. It found that every dollar spent on culling donkeys generated $3.80 for the pastoral industry. Any culling exercise has to exceed the capacity of the animal to reproduce. This is a weakness of the trap-neuter-release system beloved of dog worshippers. It cannot keep up with the reproduction rate of dogs. In my recent cat video, I highlighted 2 studies into TNR in California and Florida, both of which demonstrated the ineffectiveness of TNR policies. So that is my take on a view to a cull. I try to avoid emotional arguments because they are the province of the dog worshippers. I discovered that it is a complex issue, usually guided or misguided by a model that concentrates on dog welfare rather than human welfare or the welfare of the many millions of other animals that stray and feral dogs torture and kill. Culling may not deal effectively with dogs as carriers of rabies, but that is only one reason why we need dogs out of our lives. The fewer, the better. One of the criticisms of culling to control rabies is that it is non-selective and kills uninfected dogs along with infected dogs, but that is a dog-centric view. From a human welfare viewpoint, culling eases the pressure that dogs put humans under. Just imagine a future with no barking, a future in which our children don't need lessons on how to prevent a dog attack, a future in which we can enjoy our beaches, nature trails, and cycle paths without dog intrusion. That future is dog-free.